Hi Naila, thank you so much for having us here at the Impact Hub in Ottawa. For the audience, could you please briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So I'm Naila. I'm a 15-year-old really interested in the sustainability sector. And so right now within that, I'm working on a few projects. The first is a transparent and flexible solar panel leveraging nanomaterials. So right now I'm doing some research with perovskites and silver nanowires and working on getting into a lab there. And then the second project that I'm working on is a bioplastic from a very strange sounding species called duckweed.
Okay.
And so I've been working with a company based in Denmark called Pond Biomaterials on that and doing experimentation in a local university lab here at Carleton University. So those are the few projects that I'm working on in sustainability, and then I'm also trying to get a little bit more into coding. So I just created an algorithm to predict the output of photovoltaic systems, and I love to write outside of STEM as well. So I had my first novel published last February, and then working on a few other writing projects, but mainly focusing on STEM for now.
Makes sense. Wonderful. So where do you get that drive and passion for sustainability? You're still very young, but doing all these wonderful things. Where did that come from exactly?
I think it really first began in the 5th grade. It was a really typical grade 5 energy project that we did, and everyone was assigned different topics. So I looked into geothermal energy, and I think that was the first time my eyes were just very much open to our global consumption of fossil fuels and how this impacts everything, not only our society, but also, or not only our environment, but also our society and our economy. And so I was really kind of impacted by that. And from then on, I would stay up to date with the latest news in sustainability. I was reading articles. And then a really big accelerator for my growth was the Knowledge Society, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about today.
Yeah, it's fine.
But that was what forced me. It was kind of a forcing function to take my interests and then go and design real ideas, build real projects. So yeah, I think those were a few things that kind of triggered that interest within me.
Makes sense. So you mentioned it. You mentioned the project that you are involved with in renewable energy, the transparent and flexible solar panel that you've been working on in the past few months, if I'm not wrong. Can you please tell us more about it and why it has the potential to be revolutionary?
Yeah, so I think I started paying more attention to solar energy towards the beginning of grade 9. And when I was driving to school with my parents or to the mall or wherever, I noticed there were a lot more solar panels, mainly on roofs, some in fields. And that was really exciting to me because I was completely aware of climate change. I think we're all aware of climate change now. And I thought, maybe we're making this shift to renewable energies. And then when I dug into the statistics just a little bit, I realized that solar energy only accounts for 3% of our global electricity production, which was super disappointing to me. So I started looking into why this was, because I was seeing more solar panels. And then I noticed this issue of accessibility, because again, you only do see these solar panels on roofs and in fields. But what if you could have a solar panel on your window or on your car or, on your phone? You could be outside texting and your phone could be being charged by the sun. That'd be really cool.
Of course.
And so I started looking into how this reality could potentially come to life. And I started looking into transparent and flexible solar panels and developing this idea around that. It started with very basic research, like just how does a solar panel work and really understanding the fundamentals, because I did not know. And then as I kind of started going into...
Sorry to interrupt, but how did you do that? It was basically just watching videos on YouTube? Was it through the Knowledge Society? Was it through other means? So how did you manage to get access to the knowledge that would, make you capable of working on this type of project?
Yeah, so basically through the Knowledge Society, there are these modules or these explorers on different topics, quantum computing, fusion energy, artificial intelligence, and there's one on nanotechnology. I was looking at that and doing that explore over the winter break, and I came across a module on this intersection of nanotechnology with solar energy. And so that is actually where my research began, just looking at it through the lens of nanotech, and then just finding articles from there. There's so much online.
Absolutely.
That I was watching videos, I was reading articles, but then to get more depth, you have to go into papers, and so that was my first experience reading these scientific papers, which was really difficult at the beginning because there were a bunch of words I just did not understand.
Yeah, of course.
But I started just like reading papers every single week, and then from there I started reaching out to people on LinkedIn. LinkedIn has been a really great resource for me with networking.
Yeah.
Just look at really cool companies within the solar space, and I'd reach out to the CEOs and the chemists and be like, would I be able to have 15 minutes of your time? I'm trying to develop this idea, and I would love to run it by you, because I was researching this, maybe for a few months at that point, and they may have been in that field for like 20 years. And so when I would go on these calls, I'd be like, this doesn't make sense, and you haven't considered this, and what about this? And through going on these calls every single week and continuing to do this reading with scientific papers, I started coming up with a more concrete and actually feasible idea.
So everyone took you seriously at first? Because you reach out, it's cold outreach, and how can people take you seriously? Because maybe because of your age, maybe because they don't know you. So how do you manage to actually get their attention? That's really interesting.
Yeah, I was actually really surprised by just how encouraging people were.
Okay.
I think people were very supportive because I also knew, like, when I was going into a call, I did not want to waste that person's time. And so I was taking the time before that call to come up with good questions and research them, research their background, and so that I knew what I was talking about. And also because I was reading these papers and, watching these videos every few days, I was getting a little bit more depth in my knowledge. So I could kind of showcase that as well through content, which I would put out on LinkedIn, and then people could read that content and see that, she does know a little bit about solar energy and stuff like that. So people were, in general, like, very, very nice. So it was great. Yeah, people are amazing resources. I did not realize that you could just reach out to people that you did not know and ask them for 20 minutes of their time. But I've gotten a lot of knowledge and understanding just through speaking to people.
That's crazy. And so basically, how did you get the resources to, again, develop the technology that you've been working on in terms of renewable energy, in terms of the solar panel that we mentioned? What kind of support did you get? Materials, non-material,
Right. So with specificity to the solar panel, I haven't actually been able to start building it yet.
Okay.
It's more still an idea phase, and then I'm hoping to start building it over the summer, because right now I just have to prioritize my bioplastic a little, because building two projects at the same time can be a little much.
Yes, of course.
So I haven't actually started building this out, but I did go into a lab over the Christmas break, and I got to work on solar panels. And I just did that through actually reaching out to a bunch of people in solar, like I said, and then one of them was the COO and lead chemist at QD Solar, which is a really cool startup within the solar space. And this guy we started going on like recurring calls every few weeks. Like, they were honestly pretty far apart, but it was at very different phases. So we were seeing that I was still working on this project, and I was actually planning on interning there last summer, and there was a COVID outbreak. And so I was upset. Obviously, I did not get to intern there, and it would have been a cool experience. I ended up getting to work on my bioplastic, so it all worked out in the end. But I messaged him, and I was like, is there any way that I could potentially build out my solar cell at your lab? And he said, sure, like, can you come in the fall? And I was like, you guys are based in Toronto, and I'm in Ottawa, so it's weird with school, because I can't just go and miss a chunk of school. But we had this opportunity over the break where I was just shadowing and watching how a solar cell is built, which was pretty cool. But then hopefully over the summer I'll get the opportunity to go in and start building out that concept.
That is wonderful. Thanks for making the connection with my next question. So you were the youngest intern at a company called Pond Biomaterial, the Danish company that you mentioned. You are the youngest intern at this company, and you've been working on a type of bioplastic. Can you please tell us more about it? And what have you been up to in that field?
Yeah, so again, networking has been really key in getting that internship, but I started looking into bioplastics last May, I think, and or maybe it was last February, sometime last year.
Yeah.
And I came across this article on LinkedIn about plastic pollution, and of course, I knew about plastic pollution because it's a very known problem today. But I read through the article, and towards the end, there was this part on different solutions to plastic pollution. One of those solutions was bioplastics, and it really caught my attention, and it was just something I was immediately interested in. I started reading more into it, and I was just really, really intrigued. I wasn't even actively looking for a new project. Like, I was still kind of working on my idea for a solar cell, but this just piqued my interest completely, and it was something that I just automatically loved. Basically, bioplastics are bio-based versions of plastics today, and so our plastics come from fossil fuels like coal, oil, petroleum, but bioplastics come from crops like corn and sugarcane and potatoes. And that's a lot better than our traditional plastics, but still, when you hear corn, you probably don't think of a material, you think of a food, because it is something that humans consume. And so if you have a bunch of food going towards bioplastics that we're trying to scale to the same extent as plastics today, that's not very sustainable, and it's not even very scalable. You're taking up a ton of land and a bunch of food needed to feed a rapidly increasing population, especially with climate change. So I noticed this problem, and I started looking into second-generation aquatic feedstocks, which are basically crops that humans don't consume and that grow in water. So you don't have to take up land, and you're not cutting into human consumption. And one of these species was algae. So I was looking into this quite actively, and I was reaching out to people. One of the people I reached out to was the CEO of Pond Biomaterials, because I came across their research. I think they had just won some award or something like that. So I reached out to the CEO, and we went on a call together, and we started having pretty recurring calls. Every 1 to 2 weeks, we were going on calls with one another, and I was just keeping up to date with my research. And as I was researching, going deeper into algae, I had a lot of questions, and he had a lot of experience. So he was answering my questions, giving me ideas, all of that. And so I kept going deeper, and he was kind of following along with this journey and my progress. I ended up noticing with algae that it was very expensive to harvest. And I was kind of at a crossroads, because I was like, I feel like, first of all, there's a lot of people looking into reducing the cost of algae. And secondly, to do this, you kind of have to go in and genetically engineer the algae, which is not really my type of beat. I'm not the biggest biology person in the world. And so I kind of ended up pivoting and looking at if there was a second generation aquatic feedstock like algae that wasn't as expensive. And so that's when I came across duckweed. So again, very weird name. But I started researching this, and it's a second generation aquatic feedstock. It's the fastest growing species in the world. So it can double its biomass in as little as 16 hours, which is pretty insane. And it's kind of the species that everybody hates, because when you have aquariums or ponds, duckweed, once you get a little bit of it, it's just everywhere. And so people want to get rid of it. And I saw this, and I was like, this may suck for people, but it would be really good for a bioplastic that we wanted to scale to the extent of plastics today. And there's really no one in this space as in comparison to algae, where there are so many people. And so I started looking into turning this duckweed into a bioplastic, and through this, I was again going on calls with the CEO of Pond, and it was nearing summer, so he asked me if I wanted to come and intern at their company and work on this project over the summer. So I was really excited about that, and I ended up doing that over this summer, where I was also actively working with the CTO and lead chemist at Pond, and just understanding the process and the science behind how you could turn duckweed into an actual bioplastic. So over the summer, I was actually just writing a lot of procedures. It was very, very much research-based, because before you build, you really just have to understand the process. So it was definitely difficult and challenging, but I found it super, super fun and a great way to spend the summer. And then I realized, I have to get into a lab to work on this, and I can't really work on this at Pond because I go to school in Ottawa and they are in Denmark. So I had to find a local lab here, and I ended up getting into a lab at Carleton University, like I mentioned. And so I've been working there since October, and I kind of thought since I had been doing all this research over the summer, writing these procedures, that there was going to be immediate success. I would get my bioplastic in a few months and it would be amazing. That's not the case at all. So the first step was like extracting or degrading the duckweed starch so that you could convert this into simple sugars to ferment. And I just had 4 months of failure on end, and I actually just got the experiment to work like maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. So now I'm working on like this lactic acid and fermentation part of things, but it's been very difficult in terms of failure and kind of just looking at failure in a different way, because it's not always fun to see that your experiment is not working over and over and over again. But it's been a part of the process, and now I'm finally moving on to the next step. So hopefully I'm really aiming to have a proof of concept by this summer. I know that my timings have usually been very much underestimated, so hopefully that's feasible, but yeah, that is the goal right now. And then from there, like maybe even looking into getting the bioplastic on the market via Pond Biomaterials.
That is absolutely impressive. Thank you so much for these insights, and yeah, good luck for whatever is next. But my question to you is, how do you manage to keep a balanced lifestyle with all of this? So you're working on different kind of projects, you have school, you probably have other things in your life as well. How do you keep it balanced and healthy for you as well, and just enjoy the process as well? How do you manage to do this at the same time?
Yeah, I think balance is definitely very critical, and some people, like maybe even myself last year, thought, if you just work all the time, then it's like, that's the best case scenario, but it's really not, and that just results in burnout. And so I have always been like very adamant about rest and just keeping a balance and staying active and hanging out with your friends and whatever. And so I think it took a little bit of trial and error, because again, like it was really last year when I started working on these projects, so I was balancing a lot of different things, but I started just writing out my goals like the day before. And like again, it took some trial and error, because sometimes I would list out too much and I just felt burnt out by the end of the day. But now, since I've been doing this every day for like a year and a half, now I understand what I can take much more.
Makes sense.
And so I will always list out at the beginning of the week all of my goals and kind of bucket them as well. So I'll have, this is what you're doing for your bioplastic, this is what you're doing for your coating, this is what you're doing for school. Like if I have a very heavy week of school, I'm not going to be doing as many projects. This is what you're doing for your social life. Like you're going to a sleepover on Friday, so you're not doing any work then. And like this is your sports practices this week, all of this. And so then I make sure that my daily goals reflect my weekly goals. And it definitely can be busy, but I think I really love everything that I'm doing. So when I do get to work on my bioplastic, I just see that as honestly fun.
That's
like
key. That's key.
It is super kind of fun, everything that I'm doing. And right now I have 6 sports practices a week as well, because I'm on the volleyball and badminton team. So there's definitely like different things to balance, but I know that my number one priority is my health, and so that's just going to go above everything. And if I'm feeling really bad one week, I'm not going to be pushing my projects or anything like that. So I think just seeing like what I can take, and then always making sure that I have my monthly goals, my weekly goals, and my daily goals, and they all reflect one another in terms of my priorities.
That is fantastic. Now, what advices do you have for other curious minds, ambitious young people that also want to have an impact, but maybe don't really know where to start? Like, what advices would you give them? From your own experience, obviously.
Yeah, I would say just starting is the best place to start. I feel like we all kind of have something at the back of our minds that we say that we're going to start, and we just don't make the time for it. And if you know that you're interested in something, just go out and start doing that research or whatever it is. Like reach out to people, because starting is the most difficult part, and it's not always going to be a smooth like journey, but I think you're not going to know what you like unless you try it out.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
so for me, like I knew I was very interested in the environment last year at the beginning of the year, but that's super broad.
Of course.
So then I started researching, what that encompasses. I narrowed it down to sustainable energy, and then I narrowed it down to like solar energy, and then I narrowed it down to the intersection of solar energy with nanotechnology. But you can't do that unless you go out and just do active research and just follow your curiosity.
And expose yourself. And
exactly, just exposing yourself to a bunch of different topics. And I was also like looking into quantum computing and AI and cellular agriculture and seeing what piqued my interest the most. And it was sustainability. And so I think just kind of following your curiosity is the number one thing, and just starting to do what you want to do.
Yeah, no, makes sense. That really resonates with me and hopefully with a lot of people in the audience. Now, what are the major skills do you think young people should focus on developing?
I think literally the number one thing for me has been networking. It is such a valuable skill, and I kind of always envision it as something that old men do, and it was kind of something that I thought that maybe I'd do when I was older.
Yeah.
But then I was exposed to, again, actually through TCAS is how I learned how to network.
Yeah.
But just through like getting a LinkedIn account, you can just reach out to pretty much anyone. So many people are on LinkedIn. And so if you find a cool company, you can just reach out to the CEO, and that is definitely not a guarantee that they're going to respond. And it might be embarrassing if they say no, but you should not let embarrassment be something that prevents you from going out and reaching your potential. So I think networking is a really, really big skill. And then other skills, I think like researching and writing and those kinds of hard skills are important as well, because if you do want to go out and start building your own projects, communication with that is very important. That's kind of a given with projects, and that's kind of just something that happens with practice. And so I think when you're working on these projects and training how to follow this curiosity, also like reaching out to people is really key alongside that, so it all kind of goes together.
That's great. Wonderful. Those are really inspiring insights. We haven't mentioned, your writing skills. Obviously, I don't know if the audience know already, but if I'm not mistaken, you wrote 3 books already. One is one is a bestseller on Amazon. Am I correct?
Yes, I just have 1 book at that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. No, because I heard that you started to write and then you didn't end up finishing those books. Is it true or like yeah?
I started writing. Well, I wrote a sequel. It's not like my main kind of project right now.
Yeah.
And then I also started working on a children's book series on emerging technologies.
Yeah.
That's something I kind of put on the back burner.
Okay.
I think it's something I really want to do at some point, but it's just not something that I can really prioritize right now. So I've just had 1 novel published, and I also had a short story published, like in grade 7. But that was just an anthology. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much. Do you have any last comments for the audience? Thoughts, advices, anything you'd like to share?
I think I think that's great. Yeah, and thank you so much again for having me and interviewing me. I had a really fun time.
No problem. I had a really good time as well. Thank you so much for your time, and good luck for whatever's next.
Awesome.
Cheers.
Thank you.